That tree was standing here before this neighborhood had a name, Warren Fenwick said, looking past Patricia Cartwright's clipboard toward the longleaf pine rising above the roofs of Pine Glass Hollow Court. The late morning sun flashed across rows of pale siding, trimmed hedges, and identical black mailboxes while sprinkler heads hissed in rotating bursts along the cul-de-sac. Dry needles whispered across Warren's gravel drive, carrying the warm smell of pine resin and fresh asphalt from the resurfaced entrance road. Patricia did not look up. She stood at the edge of his lawn in a cream blazer, narrow dark slacks, and polished heels that sank slightly into the sandy North Carolina soil. A gold-colored HOA badge hung from her lapel, though no county seal, state emblem, or legal authority appeared anywhere on it. Behind her, the association's electric golf cart hummed beside the curb, its cup holder filled with violation envelopes arranged by house number. She had come prepared. Warren was 64, white-haired, lean, and quiet enough that most neighbors knew more about his mailbox than they knew about him. Since his wife, Elaine, had passed away, he had kept to the one-story cedar house at the closed end of the court, repairing his own shutters and taking his coffee beneath the old pine each morning. Her weathered reading chair still rested near the trunk, angled toward the place where sunset light passed through the branches. He had moved nothing. Patricia tilted her clipboard toward the canopy, as if presenting evidence to a jury, and explained that the tree created excessive visual weight over the community turnaround. She said its shadow interfered with lawn uniformity, its fallen needles crossed the decorative stone border, and its height made the neighborhood's new drone photographs appear unbalanced. Near the clubhouse, a pool filter groaned, and the faint smell of chlorine drifted across the humid air. Warren listened. Patricia continued, citing a newly drafted cul-de-sac visual openness standard that had not appeared in the covenants Warren received when he bought the property. She described the rule as a necessary modernization measure designed to protect resale values, improve curb presentation, and preserve what she called shared aesthetic confidence. Then she tapped the page beside a preliminary assessment of exactly $173.65 for canopy review and administrative field documentation. The number was absurdly precise. Warren's eyes moved from the charge to a faded blue band wrapped partway around the pine's broad trunk, nearly hidden beneath plates of reddish bark. He had noticed Patricia glance at it twice, but she never asked what it meant. Instead, she informed him that the board expected written consent for professional trimming before Friday at 5. He asked one question. Did you check the original parcel records before drafting this? Patricia gave a practiced smile and said county paperwork had no bearing on the HOA's responsibility to maintain neighborhood standards. Her heels crunched across the gravel as she stepped closer to the tree, then stopped beside Elaine's chair without acknowledging it. Warren remained still on the porch, one hand resting against the railing, his expression as calm as the glassy pond beyond the houses. That answer told him enough. By dusk, the sprinkler pipes had gone silent. The air smelled of cooling pavement, and the cul-de-sac lights cast narrow yellow bands across the lawns. Warren found a white envelope fixed to his front door with removable adhesive, positioned carefully at eye level. Across the top, in bold capital letters, were the words Notice of Canopy Noncompliance, followed by the $173.65 assessment, and a warning that additional daily administrative charges could begin without further board action. He read it twice. Then he looked at the faded blue habitat band on the tree. By 8 the next morning, Patricia Cartwright had turned her personal opinion into a policy. She called an executive landscaping session in the clubhouse, though only 3 board members attended and no homeowner notice had been posted. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee, lemon cleaner, and chlorine drifting in from the community pool beyond the glass doors. She called it urgent. Warren Fenwick received the new regulation by email at 8:17 a.m., formatted beneath the association's official letterhead and carrying the Grand Title Cul-de-sac Visual Openness Standard. It prohibited any tree canopy that created disproportionate visual enclosure within 75 feet of a shared turnaround, a phrase that did not appear anywhere in the recorded covenants. A second page demanded his signature authorizing a 40% reduction of the longleaf pine before Friday at 5. Warren read every line. Outside, sprinkler heads clicked across the lawns, and the HOA golf cart rolled slowly past his mailbox with a soft electric whine. Patricia sat behind the wheel wearing a navy blazer despite the rising heat, her clipboard balanced against the steering column as she photographed his yard. The scent of warming asphalt mixed with pine resin near the curb. Warren watched from the kitchen window. At 10:30, Owen Bellamy arrived in a white utility truck marked Sandhill Arbor Care. He was a certified arborist with sun-reddened forearms, a measuring tape clipped to his belt, and the cautious manner of someone accustomed to separating dangerous trees from inconvenient ones. Patricia followed him across Warren's gravel drive, her heels grinding sharply against the stones. Warren met them beneath the tree. Owen examined the root flare, tapped the trunk, studied the crown, and found no visible decay that would justify emergency removal. He then stopped at the faded blue band on the bark and brushed away a layer of loose pine scale with his glove. His expression changed. Owen told Patricia the blue band resembled a recorded habitat designation and recommended that no pruning or removal begin until the parcel records and environmental restrictions had been verified. Patricia's smile tightened. She said the board had already determined that the tree presented an aesthetic obstruction and asked him to limit his report to trimming logistics. Owen repeated that the tree appeared structurally sound. Patricia did not write that down. Warren stood with his hands relaxed at his sides while cicadas buzzed from the hotter edge of the woods. He told both of them, clearly and without raising his voice, that he did not consent to entry, pruning, or removal. Then he asked Owen to include that statement in his field notes. Patricia answered before Owen could. The association has emergency discretion. Warren looked at her clipboard. Show me where. For the first time, she hesitated. By late afternoon, Owen had emailed a recommendation to suspend the work pending verification of the blue habitat band, but Patricia forwarded a revised instruction to the landscaping contractor. She reclassified the project as an emergency aesthetic correction and claimed the association accepted responsibility for access. At 5:42 p.m., Warren received 3 new charges: $26.90 for needle migration documentation, $487.35 for sightline restoration escrow, and a $39.85 board review processing surcharge. The total now stood at $727.75. He saved the email, printed the attachment, and placed both copies in a gray file folder. Across the cul-de-sac, Patricia told the contractor to schedule the work for Monday morning. In a work order note later preserved by the management portal, Patricia wrote that Warren usually left home early on Mondays. He heard the golf cart fade into the evening. Then he checked his cameras. Monday began with a pale sky and the thin mechanical chatter of sprinklers cycling across Pineglass Hollow Court. Warren Fenwick left his driveway at 6:42 a.m. in an aging silver pickup, following the same route he used every Monday to visit a forestry archive outside the county. His porch camera recorded the red glow of his taillights disappearing beyond the neighborhood entrance, while dry pine needles scraped softly across the pavement. The street went quiet. At 7:18, a white bucket truck turned into the cul-de-sac, followed by a wood chipper and a flatbed trailer carrying orange cones. The crew wore fluorescent shirts from a subcontractor Warren had never seen, not the company that had sent Owen Bellamy. Patricia Cartwright arrived behind them in the HOA golf cart, dressed in a powder blue blazer, dark sunglasses, and narrow heels that clicked against the curb. She carried her clipboard like a warrant. The morning air smelled of damp grass, diesel exhaust, and hot hydraulic fluid as the workers unloaded ropes and chainsaws. One man paused at Warren's property marker and pointed toward the private property sign beside the gravel drive. Patricia told him the association had approved emergency access under its Community Preservation Authority. He asked whether the homeowner had signed. She produced a board authorization letter and falsely represented it as sufficient permission to enter the property without Warren's signature. The first chainsaw started at 7:31, its sharp whine cutting through the hum of pool pumps and distant lawn equipment. A woman across the street stepped onto her porch in a bathrobe, then retreated when Patricia turned and photographed the house number. Another neighbor watched through closed blinds while the HOA golf cart blocked part of Warren's driveway. No one challenged her. The crew removed the lower limbs first, lowering each heavy branch with ropes to avoid damaging the roof. Pine resin ran in amber streaks from the fresh cuts, filling the yard with a strong, clean scent that mixed strangely with the chipper's bitter exhaust. Patricia directed the workers to clear every branch before Warren returned and reminded them that a private real estate photographer was scheduled later that week to capture aerial images from her side of the cul-de-sac. She wanted an open sky. At 8:46, the foreman noticed the faded blue band on the trunk and asked whether it indicated a recorded habitat restriction. Patricia said it was old utility paint and ordered him to continue. Unconvinced by Patricia's answer, he photographed the blue band and uploaded the image to the subcontractor's work file before permitting the final cuts. That photograph would matter later. The trunk came down in sections, each impact shaking the sandy soil and rattling the glass in Warren's kitchen windows. Birds scattered into the neighboring pines, and no animal was harmed. The crew saw no active nest in the exposed branches, but none of them had the training or recorded habitat map required to recognize a federally documented cavity tree. By 10:12, the longleaf pine had been reduced to a broad stump surrounded by pale sawdust. Patricia stood beside it, satisfied. She instructed the crew to load the trunk sections onto the flatbed, grind the smaller debris, and leave the stump low enough for future landscaping. The foreman refused to grind it without a separate authorization because the root system extended near buried utility lines. Patricia wrote something on her clipboard and called that delay noncompliance. At 12:27, Warren's pickup returned. He stopped at the entrance to the cul-de-sac when he saw the empty space above his house, then drove the final 100 yards without increasing his speed. Neighbors waited behind windows for shouting. Warren stepped out, smelled raw wood and warm sawdust, and looked at Elaine's chair sitting alone in direct sunlight. He said nothing. He photographed the tire tracks, property markers, stump, cut surfaces, and equipment impressions before touching anything. Near the fence, he found a curved piece of bark-bearing part of the faded blue habitat band. He put on clean gloves, placed it inside a paper evidence bag, and wrote the time across the seal. Then he looked directly at the porch camera. It had recorded everything. Warren began before the sawdust had cooled. He stretched yellow survey cord around the stump, marked 4 reference points with number garden stakes, and photographed the site from the same height and distance at each position. The afternoon sun pressed heat from the driveway, carrying the smell of raw pine, diesel residue, and sandy soil through the open yard. Nothing moved without a record. He put on fresh nitrile gloves before collecting 3 wood fragments, a section of bark-bearing part of the blue band, and a sealed sample of sawdust from the final cut. Each item went into a separate paper evidence bag labeled with the date, time, exact location, and camera frame number. He measured the stump twice across its widest points, noted the saw angle, and documented the tire impressions left beyond the property line. He knew the routine. For 27 years, Warren had analyzed damaged timber, disputed boundaries, and altered tree rings in cases where ordinary photographs were never enough. He understood how moisture trapped in plastic could compromise a sample and how an unrecorded transfer could weaken an otherwise perfect claim. He had never mentioned that work at an HOA meeting. Patricia had mistaken privacy for ignorance. By 2:10 p.m., Warren had copied the porch footage onto an encrypted drive, a second external disk, and a cloud folder with automatic timestamps. The recordings showed Patricia entering first, directing the crew across his property markers, and identifying herself as the person who had authorized access. They also captured the foreman questioning the blue habitat band and Patricia dismissing it without inspection. She had supplied the narration herself. Warren then photographed Elaine's chair in its original position, the flattened needles beneath it, and the sudden strip of unfiltered sunlight crossing the weathered wooden seat. For several seconds, He stood with one hand on the chair back while a sprinkler hissed 2 houses away and a golf cart rolled slowly past the curb. The driver glanced toward the stump, but did not stop. Warren returned to work. At 3:26, he emailed a formal preservation notice to Patricia, the management company, the tree subcontractor, and every voting board member. It required them to retain contracts, invoices, field photographs, internal messages, access instructions, meeting notes, insurance communications, and all versions of the newly adopted landscaping rule. Patricia answered 11 minutes later, calling the request excessive and stating that the association had completed a lawful community correction. Warren saved that too. Before sunset, he contacted the County Register of Deeds office and requested the original subdivision plat, deed exhibits, easement schedules, and every conservation instrument recorded before development. The clerk warned that several pre-development plats and conservation exhibits remained on microfilm and would require a manual archival search. Warren gave her the parcel number from memory and paid the $18.40 archival retrieval charge online. He did not rush her. Night settled over Pine Glass Hollow Court with the smell of cooling asphalt and faint chlorine from the closed pool. Under the porch light, the exposed stump looked pale and unnatural against the dark yard, while insects clicked in the shrubs where the pine's shadow had once fallen. Warren placed his handwritten timeline beside the gray folder and checked every entry against the video clock. Then he turned off the light. At 9:14 the next morning, the county clerk emailed a scan plat. A shaded boundary surrounded the exact location of the missing tree. Warren enlarged the scan plat until the faded boundary lines sharpened across his computer screen. A crosshatched circle enclosed the former location of a longleaf pine, and the lower margin identified it as baseline cavity tree H7, a documented red-cockaded woodpecker habitat tree covered by a recorded conservation easement and an Endangered Species Act habitat management permit. The permit legend assigned a blue paint band to H-series cavity trees, matching the fragment Warren had preserved. The restriction had been recorded before the first house in Pine Glass Hollow Court was built. He spent the morning matching parcel numbers, recording dates, and comparing the blue habitat band on the bark fragment with the markings shown in the county's Archive Conservation Index. Outside, maintenance crews edged identical lawns while the smell of cut grass drifted through a screened window. The exposed yard remained unnaturally bright, and each gust pushed pale sawdust against the survey cord surrounding the stump. Warren did not call Patricia. At 11:08, Owen Bellamy forwarded the field report he had submitted before the removal. It stated that the pine was structurally stable, showed no emergency defect, and carried a marking that required verification before pruning or cutting. Beneath the report was Patricia's written response instructing the contractor to proceed under her revised aesthetic emergency classification. She had signed it electronically. Warren saved both messages. That afternoon, Nora Graham arrived without using the HOA golf cart. The 58-year-old treasurer walked up the gravel drive carrying a plain accounting envelope, her steps crunching slowly beneath the heavy summer silence. The envelope carried the dry smell of copier toner, while cool pond air followed her in from the clubhouse footbridge. Her hand shook once. Nora explained that Patricia had paid the subcontractor $6,842.70 from the emergency reserve, although the bylaws required 2 board signatures and a recorded vote for any non-safety expense above $2,500. No such vote had occurred. Patricia had asked Nora to add one afterward. Nora refused. Warren accepted copies of the payment authorization, the unsigned draft minutes, and a text message in which Patricia wrote that residents rarely checked procedural details. He did not ask Nora to take sides. He asked her to preserve the originals. At 4:33, another association email arrived. After 2 days of $83.15 board non-compliance continuation charges, Patricia added a $47.60 cooperative access deficiency fee. She warned that unpaid balances could lead to lien preparation, bringing Warren's alleged total to $941.65. Warren printed the statement. He then sent a second preservation notice covering revised minutes, reserve transfers, board texts, insurance reports, and communications about his Monday schedule. He copied the management company's legal department. Patricia replied from her phone, saying his demands were evidence that he intended to intimidate the community. 10 minutes later, she emailed every homeowner, accusing Warren of obstructing neighborhood safety and attempting to use obscure paperwork against lawful HOA authority. The message included no arborist report, no recorded vote, and no mention of her private real estate photographs. It included her signature. Warren read the email once, filed it with the others, and used the recorded permit number to locate the current regional federal habitat office. He attached the plat, the photograph of the bark bearing the blue habitat band, Owen's warning, and the time-stamped removal footage. His message contained 6 sentences. At 8:06 the next morning, the regional office acknowledged receipt, assigned a preliminary compliance file number, and directed Warren to leave the stump, soil, and remaining wood fragments undisturbed pending inspection. Warren printed the response and placed it inside the gray folder. Across the cul-de-sac, Patricia added another charge. Patricia scheduled a special corrective session for Thursday evening and posted the notice less than 24 hours beforehand, placing it behind the clubhouse bulletin board's locked glass where few residents would see it. Inside, fluorescent tubes buzzed above rows of metal folding chairs, while damp footprint from the pool entrance darkened the vinyl floor. She wore a coral blazer, pearl earrings, and the gold HOA badge that had begun to look less official each time Warren examined it. She intended to repair the paperwork. All 5 voting directors were present, Patricia and 4 other board members, including Nora Graham, who carried the original reserve ledger beneath her arm. Patricia distributed draft minutes claiming that the board had approved the removal during an executive safety vote the previous week. The document listed Nora as present, recorded her vote as affirmative, and assigned her approval to the reserve withdrawal. Nora had not attended the meeting, cast a vote, or authorized the payment. She closed the folder. Patricia lowered her voice and reminded her that committee assignments, pool privileges, and access to association records could be reconsidered for anyone who obstructed board operations. Nora did not move. Then reconsider them in writing. Across the room, a ceiling vent clicked off, leaving a heavy silence broken only by water splashing beyond the glass doors. Warren sat in the last row wearing a gray work shirt, his thin folder resting unopened on his knees. Patricia avoided looking at him while announcing that his account had accumulated another $166.30 in continuation charges, a $54.25 administrative resistance review fee, and a $31.80 certified notice preparation assessment. With 2 additional daily charges, the review fee and the notice assessment added, his alleged balance now stood at exactly $1,194. Patricia said the management company would begin lien preparation if he failed to pay within 10 business days. Warren wrote down the date. The next morning, the HOA's insurer requested every document connected to the removal, including Owen Bellamy's report and the board's authorization. Patricia sent the altered draft minutes, but omitted Owen's warning. Nora forwarded the insurer a preserved copy of the original ledger and explained the discrepancy. By noon, the insurer had issued a reservation of rights letter stating that intentional acts performed after a professional warning might fall outside portions of the association's coverage. Patricia called it routine. It was not. She responded by hiring a local public relations consultant with another $1,275.50 from the operating account and circulated a statement claiming the tree had posed an immediate safety concern. Owen answered with a signed technical declaration confirming that he had found no structural emergency. Warren saved both. On Friday afternoon, the heat settled over Pine Glass Hollow Court, making the fresh asphalt smell sharp enough to reach the porches. Sprinklers hissed in uneven arcs while residents collected near their mailboxes, pretending to discuss irrigation schedules as they watched Warren's exposed stump. At 2:36, 2 dark government fleet vehicles entered the cul-de-sac without sirens, flashing lights, or ceremony. They parked beside Warren's gravel drive. A woman in an olive field jacket stepped out carrying a waterproof case, followed by a second federal investigator and an ecological services habitat biologist with mapping equipment and a soil probe. Patricia arrived 3 minutes later in the HOA golf cart, her heels striking the pavement as she approached with her clipboard raised against her chest. Helena Reddick introduced herself as a special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement. The investigator beside her identified himself as Special Agent Daniel Harrow, while the third member of the team introduced herself as an ecological services habitat biologist. Special Agent Reddick directed that the stump, soil, and remaining wood fragments remain undisturbed during the administrative inspection. She compared the archive map to Warren's survey stakes, photographed the bark bearing the blue habitat band, and measured the recorded protective buffer. Patricia interrupted twice to explain that the HOA had acted under emergency authority. Special Agent Reddick asked who had authorized the removal after the written habitat warning was received. Patricia straightened her blazer. "I did." Special Agent Reddick wrote it down. The emergency meeting filled every folding chair in the clubhouse and left a second row of residents standing along the glass doors. At the request of 4 voting directors, the HOA attorney, an insurance representative, Special Agents Reddick and Harrow, and the habitat biologist had also attended to address the pending claims and compliance findings. The packed room held the dry heat of too many bodies, while a ceiling fan ticked above the rustle of printed agendas and whispered conversations. Patricia Cartwright sat beneath the association seal in a cream blazer, her gold badge pinned high and her clipboard centered before her like a shield. Warren carried one thin gray folder. Patricia opened with a prepared statement about community autonomy, neighborhood safety, and the board's duty to act when individual homeowners refused reasonable cooperation. She described the removal as a lawful correction, repeated that the tree had threatened visibility, and claimed Warren was exploiting administrative confusion to punish the entire community. Her voice remained polished until Special Agent Reddick placed the archived habitat map and permit record on the table. Then it tightened. Special Agent Reddick explained that the recorded conservation boundary predated the HOA and that baseline cavity tree H7 could not be disturbed without the written review required by the habitat management permit. She spoke without accusation, identifying the recorded easement, the protected buffer, and the administrative restoration process triggered by the unauthorized removal. The board's landscaping preference did not cancel those obligations. Patricia claimed that the subcontractor had accepted her authorization as sufficient, carefully avoiding any mention of Owen's written warning. Owen Bellamy stood from the second row and handed the board secretary a printed copy of his field report, along with the email warning that the blue habitat band required verification. He confirmed that the pine had shown no structural emergency and that he had advised suspension before any cutting occurred. Patricia had answered in writing. Nora Graham spoke next, opening the reserve ledger to the payment entry for $6,842.70. She showed that no valid vote had authorized the withdrawal, that the draft minutes were created after the removal, and that her name had been included despite her absence. The scratch of residents, shifting in their chairs, stopped completely. Silence settled. Warren waited until the HOA attorney asked whether he wished to respond. He walked to the front, placed the gray folder on the table, and arranged 5 items in order. The original plat, the time-stamped camera index, Owen's warning, Patricia's authorization, and the insurer's reservation of rights letter. He did not mention Elaine's chair. He did not need to. The video played on the clubhouse screen, showing Patricia directing the crew across Warren's property line, dismissing the foreman's question about the blue habitat band, and identifying herself as the person accepting responsibility. When the video ended, Warren displayed photographs of the stump measurements and the preserved bark sample. His ring count, diameter calculations, and the archived baseline inventory independently placed the pine between 198 and 205 years old. Patricia accused him of setting a trap by withholding his professional background. Warren looked at her evenly and said he had asked her to examine the parcel records before she acted, while Owen had separately warned her to stop. Warren had also denied entry and removal in writing. Twice. The insurance representative then explained that deliberate action taken after a documented professional warning could fall outside key liability protections. The HOA attorney added that no badge, board title, or landscaping policy granted Patricia authority to enter private property or sign consent on Warren's behalf. Patricia struck the meeting gavel and ordered the discussion closed. No one stopped speaking. A board member moved to suspend her. Executive authority pending a formal removal vote, and another seconded the motion before she could respond. The vote passed 4-1. Patricia stared at the raised hands, then at the clipboard beneath her fingers. For the first time, it commanded nothing. The consequences arrived without sirens, uniforms, or raised voices. They came through certified letters, insurance exclusions, consultant invoices, and a restoration estimate thick enough to bend the brass clips holding it together. 3 weeks after the meeting, the clubhouse conference table was covered with reports that smelled of fresh toner and damp paper from a morning thunderstorm. Patricia Cartwright was no longer seated at its head. The acting board majority's first formal resolution canceled every charge on Warren Fenwick's account, including the $173.65 canopy dominance assessment, the $26.90 needle migration documentation fee, the $487.35 sightline restoration escrow, and every continuation charge added afterward. The management company withdrew its lien preparation notice and reimbursed Warren $112.40 for certified mail, records request, and administrative expenses caused by the defective enforcement process. His balance became zero. Then the larger figures appeared. An independent forestry appraiser valued the lost tree and its effect on the property at $112,825. Because the removal had continued after written warnings and without Warren's consent, his civil demands sought 3 times the appraised tree loss, then added $26,316.80 in habitat restoration and $21,950 in expert, surveying, and evidence preservation costs. The preliminary civil exposure totaled $386,741.80. Every dollar could be traced. No one spoke for several seconds. The insurer agreed to defend the HOA as an organization but reserved the right to deny coverage for decisions made knowingly after Owen Bellamy's warning. Board members who had not approved the work remained provisionally protected, while Patricia's personal authorization, altered minutes, and written dismissal of the habitat concern were placed under separate review. Her confidence had become expensive. Nora Graham opened the operating ledger and showed residents the $6,842.70 removal payment, the $1,275.50 public relations expense, and $3,918.25 in legal consultation generated before the special meeting. The reserve account had not been designed for private landscaping campaigns. Homeowners who once avoided eye contact now demanded copies. At the formal removal vote, Patricia arrived carrying a leather portfolio instead of her clipboard. The gold badge was gone. She argued that she had acted to preserve community values and claimed every board president occasionally made unpopular decisions. Owen's report, the camera footage, and her own emails remained on the projector screen behind her. Of 31 valid homeowner ballots, 29 favored removal and 2 opposed it. She was removed. The new board authorized a civil settlement rather than risk years of litigation and a larger uninsured judgment. Warren agreed on strict conditions. His legal and expert costs would be reimbursed. The habitat area would receive independently supervised restoration. All false assessments would be permanently erased, and no emergency special assessment would be imposed on homeowners while insurance coverage and Patricia's personal contribution were being allocated. The HOA contributed from reserves and negotiated payment terms with its insurer. After the insurer reserved its rights against her, Patricia signed a separate contribution agreement requiring payment from her own funds as a condition of avoiding further civil litigation. She then resigned from every committee. She also withdrew her house from the market after prospective buyers began asking why the association's financial disclosures contain a major pending restoration obligation. Her perfect sales campaign collapsed under its own paperwork. By late afternoon, rainwater ran along the clubhouse gutters and carried the cold mineral smell of the nearby pond across the parking lot. Patricia left through the side door with the leather portfolio pressed against her chest, while residents remained inside reviewing the new financial controls. No one followed her. Nothing she carried conferred authority anymore. 10 weeks later, after counsel for the HOA and the agency had exchanged restoration terms, an executed federal administrative consent agreement arrived in a plain envelope, without spectacle and without room for argument. Special Agents Reddick and Harrow returned to Pineglass Hollow Court with the same habitat biologist who had helped measure the stump, and their 2 federal vehicles parked beside Warren Fenwick's gravel drive in full view of the cul-de-sac. Residents stepped onto their porches as garage doors paused mid-lift and wet pine straw released its earthy scent across the lawns. Patricia watched from behind her front window. The agreement's formal findings confirmed that the longleaf pine had been recorded as baseline cavity tree H7 within an active habitat management permit and conservation easement established before the subdivision existed. It also confirmed that the HOA had received a written professional warning, entered Warren's parcel without consent, and removed the documented cavity tree without the clearance required by the recorded permit and easement. The agents had not come to stage an arrest. They had come to document the violation, assign responsibility, and secure enforceable restoration terms. The paperwork struck harder. Separate from the private civil settlement, the agreement required the association to fund a 12-year habitat restoration plan, place the affected parcel under independent ecological monitoring, submit annual compliance reports, and reimburse $48,316.25 in federal inspection, assessment, and monitoring costs. It prohibited the HOA from authorizing any future removal of a mature tree within the recorded conservation area unless the homeowner, an independent arborist, and the appropriate environmental office approved the work in writing. Patricia's emergency aesthetic correction classification was formally rejected as having no legal effect. Her invented authority disappeared in one paragraph. The new board met that evening beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the clubhouse and adopted the mature tree and habitat due process policy by unanimous vote. Any future homeowner landscaping assessment or compelled work order required a published rule, written notice, an open board vote, and a meaningful appeal period before enforcement. No board president could create a fee by renaming a personal preference. Nora Graham posted the association's contracts, reserve withdrawals, meeting minutes, and insurance notices in a resident access portal. The locked glass bulletin board was no longer enough. Warren declined every invitation to become board president. He said the neighborhood did not need another person who enjoyed authority. It needed procedures that survive whoever happened to hold it. He agreed only to serve as an unpaid technical advisor when property boundaries, mature trees, or habitat records were involved. That was sufficient. Restoration began in early fall. Crews removed compacted soil, planted native wiregrass, and placed a small cluster of young longleaf pines beyond the preserved stump. No one pretended the new trees replaced the old one. A life that had endured for roughly 2 centuries could not be ordered from a nursery. One tagged trunk section had remained in the subcontractor's storage under Warren's evidence preservation notice. After the settlement released it, he cut a single cross-section and shaped it into a small table beside Elaine's weathered reading chair. The growth rings remained visible beneath a clear finish, each narrow line marking a drought, a storm, a fire season, or an ordinary year that the tree had survived before Pineglass Hollow Court existed. On cool evenings, Warren sat beside the young pines while dry needles rustled across the gravel and the pond carried the clean mineral smell of autumn water through the neighborhood. The cul-de-sac had not become perfect. It had become accountable. Months later, Patricia relisted the house and sold it below her original asking price. She left without ceremony in her gold. HOA badge was returned to the association and archived with the former board's materials, reduced at last to what it had always been, a decorative piece of metal. Warren did not watch the moving truck depart. He was watering the new trees. What remained was larger than one settlement or one fallen pine. A permanent due process rule requiring notice, evidence, an open vote, and a meaningful appeal before the HOA could find a homeowner or authorize work on private property. The old tree was gone, but the lesson rooted itself everywhere Patricia's authority had failed. Real power did not belong to the loudest person holding a clipboard. It belonged to the truth that could be measured, recorded, and proved. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.